Hi, everyone. I'm here with Steve Suarez today. He's the CEO of Horizon X Consulting, and you're in this sort of like future sort of trends prediction, helping companies with trends sort of business, really. And we met at the Quantum Tech Conference, so we had a very interesting conversation. So thanks very much for joining me. And I suppose I wanted just to kick off, just to talk a little about, go back to our conversation when we talked a bit about one of the things I missed, or a lot of us kind of missed, was the whole wave of sort of large language models and ChatGPT coming through. And we're having this conversation around how do you spot some of this stuff when it happens? Because I think that for a lot of us, that was a big miss. And I know you've been in this industry around spotting these trends for a long time. And so what's your kind of advice, really? I mean, what's your kind of perspective on it?
From my end is be curious, talk to people that you see are doing this type of work. So
Yeah.
the fact that I'm doing this type of work, part of my job is always to spot these future trends, to find things that I'm excited about. And so I remember reaching out, and this was back when I used to work at the bank as the global head of innovation for global functions. I always reached out to people that I was really looked up to in the different technology fields. And I would sit down, we would have coffee, sometimes we'd have lunch, and I'd ask them, what's exciting? What's keeping you excited right now? And a lot of times they would tell me about different technologies, things that things that are like mind blowing. And I remember the first time somebody brought OpenAI, and this was maybe about 2 years before the whole explosion and stuff like that. And I was thinking, this can't be real. And
Mm.
they actually gave me an early beta version of it.
Mm.
And I started seeing kind of the power of this. And I started
Yeah.
saying, wow, this is really big and is going to be huge. And at the same time, the whole quantum thing came up, and I started educating myself about that. And then the more I educated, the more I started to move from skeptic to believer that this is going to have a big impact. And you're starting to see it now. There's a lot of conversation, obviously, with the Willow chip helps push some of that out, but I don't think the Willow chip is that like chat GTP moment. And I think quantum's going to like level up, and it's not going to be a moment. It's just going to be a aggressive kind of movement up. And with next year being the International Year of Quantum, I think that's going to help move this forward for quantum anyway. Sorry.
Yeah. For quantum, so quantum computing, I think that's a fascinating couple of days for me in terms of almost like you break it out between like hardware and almost like the maths and the software around it. And obviously the maths and the software around it was moving so much faster than the hardware. And it's like we were waiting for this big kind of breakthrough to happen, almost like on the hardware side. Do you think the Willow chip is it, or you think there's more? Because I know there's a lot of chatter around that in the media, wasn't there? But is that going to solve some of the problems, or is it just like one use case? I mean, do you think there's more to go? It feels like an important step forward, at least anyway. But what do you think?
Without a doubt, it's an important step forward. So I think any improvement, you
Mm.
have to celebrate your wins. And I think
Yeah.
when I work in innovation, every time you make these wins, you're like, okay, we made that win, let's move on. I think the important part is celebrating the wins. And this is one of those wins that you have to celebrate that I think the key part of it is that it shows that quantum computers are prone to errors.
Mm.
And anything that could say, look, we can use more qubits to actually help lower that error correction is
Mm.
great. So you're increasing quality, you're increasing coherence, meaning how long you can use computation. At the same time, you're increasing the quality of those outputs and lowering the errors that you're getting. And I think the combination of all of this coming together is only making it better. And I use the analogy, Chris, when the first person, I don't know if you remember who the first person to come up with a digital camera was.
Oh, was I? No, I don't know. I don't know. Who was it? Was it the
It
guy
was
at Kodak?
it was
Yeah.
a guy at
Yeah.
Kodak. He brought it to the board early in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And he brought this big clunky machine and said, look, this is the future. It's a digital camera.
Yeah.
Let me take your picture. He took a picture of them, and it was a megapixel, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everybody looked around and said, hey, this is nice and it's cute, but please don't show it around.
Yeah.
We're a chemical company, and this is doesn't involve chemicals, and it's only 1 megapixel. There's no way
Mm.
that this will replace what we're doing. And people
Mm.
forgot the sense of this is incremental steps and it's Moore's law, right?
Mm.
And so those megapixels from one will turn to two, four, and just get much bigger. And then eventually you'll get there. And so
Mm.
all of that are steps to digital. And then You went from a Kodak to now like Instagram, that the year Kodak went bankrupt, Instagram was sold for $1 billion.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity here. And I would say that the next big companies that you're going to hear about that we don't know today, you got your future Googles, your future
Yeah.
Amazons, eBays, all that stuff out there today that I think is exciting times for me. It's like living the dot-com era all over again.
And how do we stay ahead of some of those things? I suppose when my research was like a lot of these things that we see that are new developments, they're often not new ideas. So just to take some of the mathematical kind of concepts behind some of the large language models as an example. Like modeling's been around for the longest time. What we would say elements of AI have been around for the longest time. Computing hasn't for the longest time. But it's almost like it takes a while for it to almost like break through into public consciousness, doesn't it? To a certain extent. How do we work out, look at the areas which is like going to be bubbling to a certain extent?
I have my kind of feelings and my gut feel and what I
Mm,
see and what I get excited about.
mm,
And then what I do is I play around with the technology, right?
yeah.
So I start with, I gave you the example, going out to thought leaders in
Mm,
those different industries, learning from them what they're excited about, and then meeting those companies, understanding the technology. And if they have an application or something, I get to play around and start
mm,
using it and say, hey, is this going to change my life? In other words, can I use some of this AI
yeah.
to revolutionize the way I work or productivity or any of this other stuff? And if I start saying, wow, this has got amazing potential and this is going to be big, then I start looking more into that. And the other thing is what you did, Chris, is very important. You said you went to the Quantum Tech conference. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
very eye-opening.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to do is go out to conferences, meet people, talk to thought leaders. I used to not go to conferences because I kept hearing the same thing regurgitated over and over again. But when I go to conferences and I'm learning something very new, it's exciting. The latest thing I'm looking at is space economy. And
Okay.
that just opens the door to so many different technologies.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. So there's almost like the academic side of things, which can be quite dry, and I suppose you go through looking through papers, but you're almost like saying you should wait for it to look to like when does those applications start to come through, and that's really the trigger to say, we need to be looking at this in the next 5 years or even 10 years. How far ahead do you think you can catch some of these things, these new
I like to
technologies?
look at things. I like to read about things that are 10 years ahead. I like to think about things and start working on things that are
Mm,
5 years ahead.
yeah,
If things are 2 years or 3 years ahead, I feel like I'm behind
yeah,
and I
yeah.
feel like I lost my chance. And so I like to think 5 years ahead and understand, all right, how do I position myself, my company, my organization, my people to be able to take advantage of this opportunity to educate people, to show people what this technology can do, and also be part of some of these leading companies
Mm,
that are these diamonds in the rough that need help, right? Because a lot of these guys know what they know to do, but sometimes they need a bit of structure and know how to sell to enterprise. So
mm,
you got to take it out of the lab and take it into a commercial product.
mm.
And so sometimes they need people like myself that can help them take it to big enterprises and get it into organizations and getting it into hands that of people that can create value from it.
And how do you match that against an industry? So I predominantly work in financial services as an example, right? So there'll be some technologies, so maybe, I don't know, biomedical technology as an example, that maybe is less applicable to me, but it might be very exciting, right? An example, there might be other technology, encryption, or those kind of things that's very applicable. How do you best match looking for some of this technology against individuals? For example, fast moving consumer goods as an example. How do we best think about how to then guide that search in terms of interesting technology against application within businesses and within industry?
Yeah, I think, Chris, this is where I lean on my strengths
Mm,
and the stuff that I know well, right? So the financial services,
mm,
telecom, stuff that I've done in the past. And I know the problems that these organizations deal with. And so what I do is I try to match up one side, which is the technology and these applications, and then the other side, which is the problems these guys are facing day to day,
yeah,
and I'm looking to fill that gap. And
yeah,
so if I can fill that gap, I know what an amazing opportunity it is for some of these people. And it's like the knowing doing gap that you can help fill in.
And how much of awareness do you think there is when you're out there with clients in the industry in terms of some of these future technologies? For example, let's go back to AI or large language models in AI in particular. It felt like there was a gap just in terms of knowledge, almost like we're so working so hard on the day to day. We're trying to get to the quarter end. We're looking for for results or the shareholder returns, etc. How much of awareness and how much are people thinking about this stuff? What's your reaction, I suppose, when you've been out talking with clients?
I think they're becoming more educated, but there was, when you first got out there, kind of this sense of FOMO, right? The
Mm,
feeling that they were missing out. They didn't really understand it. But the more it's mainstream, the more education is out there. I don't know how well people are translating it into true value. I
mm,
think there's still a lot of experimenting going on in the industry. And when people, it's the SMEs, once they get their hold on it, they're actually some of the best people that can say, hey, this is how I can make improvements.
mm.
Sometimes you have to get in out of the way of the people that are actually doing the day-to-day operations to do it. But I think, Chris, you brought up a really good point. A lot of these operations people have to do something, right? They have to create a widget, have to do something by the end of the day, and they get all consumed
Mm,
on that task and that activity. So they're focused on the day-to-day operations.
mm.
And the reason I called my company Horizon X is because I'd like to focus on all three horizons of innovation. You
Yeah.
got your horizon one, which is your incremental innovation. How do I make something incrementally better? And that's something we all do. And those are your operations. Those are the things we do today. There's the horizon two innovation, which is bringing new technologies, not new to the world, but new technologies to your company to see how do I make things better.
Mm.
And then there's the horizon three innovation, which is how do I really disrupt everything we do and drive that? And I feel like sometimes people go to the extremes. Either they're just focused on horizon one and forget about
Yeah.
two and three, which
Yeah.
are these companies that don't innovate. And then there's these people that go, hey, we're only doing disruptive innovation. That's all we want you to do. And that's it wastes money. It takes too long. And then a lot of those innovation teams fell off because people aren't just seeing the value. You have to have this concept that a professor of mine, Michael Tushman, calls being ambidextrous.
Mm.
It's being able to look at the operations, but also forward thinking and having that balance and knowing when to shift between both areas.
Yeah, yeah. So it's almost don't be on we used to call it like the bleeding edge. You want to be on the leading edge, if you mean. So you don't want to be like wasting money looking at the latest hot topic, but you want to be almost like translating that back through to your day-to-day operation. And that's the difficult piece. I think that middle piece sounds like that's the difficult piece because we love talking about these new great ideas. I love talking about the new great ideas, but it's like, how do you then make that practical? How do you make that reality in terms of like real use cases and putting that back into the business? Back when we were chatting about the quantum tech, we're still talking about AI. It feels like that's sort of settled down a bit now, and it's almost like we've moved from here's a fantastic idea in the future to like a little bit in the clouds to now we're actually looking at real use cases. That's my sense. So we don't talk about AI, we talk about a use case that does X or Y or this particular model. And we're into like much more grounded kind of reality on it. I mean, what are you being seeing?
I agree that people maybe have a bit of AI fatigue and they're
Yeah,
talking about use case, but I think the impact of AI is just in its infancy. And
hasn't
so
started yet.
I think people aren't going to realize how big it's going to be until a couple of years down the road. Then they start thinking, wow, look at all the different things we're doing. And this is what AI did
Yeah.
to really make this change. So I think there is a combination of, I think people are talking about it and kept talking about it and talked about it so much that at some point it was a bit overhyped. But now we're going to say, all right, now let's start making some value out of it.
But it's almost like we've normalized it. So I was looking at Amazon recommendations and used to use the Q&A around individual products because it's sort of like it's the holidays, so you're busy shopping. And now there's an AI to actually question the questions around the actual product or the reviews. And so you see it just like getting embedded into our products. And that's a real use case. It's still AI. It's what we would have called AI, but it's almost
Yeah.
like we're not labeling it AI anymore because it's just normalized. And almost like it feels like the fear around AI and sort of privacy and data feels like the temperature's going down and we're just saying this is useful.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think even just this morning, before I jumped on this call with you, I'm using a new application to do summaries on my emails and also start questioning my emails. Okay, what are the five main things I need to worry about right now? Are there any
Yeah,
things that I'm
yeah,
missing? Look at this email, give me a summary of this 15 threads of email and tell me what are the important things I need. And things that is making me more productive. And I look at where I'm wasting a lot of my time as an entrepreneur. The most valuable resource you have is time.
yeah, yeah,
And so I'm trying to find ways on how do I make myself more productive
yeah.
with these technologies. And I think once you start doing that, you start seeing what's real and impactful, then you can start saying, all right, these companies have a really good future. And then this is where you start learning on how do you help other companies do what you've learned to do yourself.
And agentic AI has been there's a lot been talked about that, which is I see that as almost instead of being the tiger, it's kind of like the anthill that's coming through, and it can be incredibly powerful in terms of generating work that gets done. What's your kind of view around? I suppose is that the next kind of level where you think we're going to go, or do you think we're going to continue with these ever larger models?
I don't think it's about the ever larging models. I actually think it's the opposite. I think we're
Mm,
going to be focused on small language models.
mm,
And so language models that actually fit my use case. And guess what? I don't even have to send these models to the cloud. I
mm,
don't have to pay to get that data to come back.
mm,
I can run it all on premises, and I don't even have to share my data with a large language model people to train their data better. I can
mm,
focus on training my data with my use case. Not every use case needs to know what the Kardashians are doing for you to be able to process stuff, right? So
mm,
these large language models have everything on the internet, and you don't want that. You want things that are focused, based results based on the data that you're looking at. And so I think there's going to be more of a focus to make small language models, reduce energy usage, reduce sending data out of your organization. It's better for protection and cybersecurity and other things. So I think there's going to be some opportunity there. I think there's from how do we use AIs as agents to help us out? I can envision to where you could have a virtual board meeting, Chris, and
mm,
you could say, look, I'm going to have an agent in this meeting that's going to be my CRO. And I'm going to have an agent in this meeting that's going to be my CFO. And
mm,
I'm going to have an agent that's going to be the devil's advocate.
mm,
And I'm going to have this meeting. I'm going to put out my ideas and I'm going to let those agents act as those specific roles and come back to me so that when
and
I
challenge you, yeah,
challenge me, give me
yeah,
ideas, and make sure they're specialized in their field and say,
mm,
yes, Steve, but you should consider X, Y, and Z, and you should do this way. It's not me just coming up with my own. Now my ideas are getting refined by
mm,
AI that actually could bring out. Now, at the end of the day, I'm the human that makes the decision, but
mm,
at least I'm being brought different perspectives. For me to bring those type of resources available to me, it's expensive. It takes time to schedule all of
mm.
this other stuff. With this AI, it's just a matter of jumping on something I built myself and being able to leverage it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I use it as like they become additional members of your team, either even in terms of like summarizing emails or in terms of summarizing documentation or summarizing even this meeting here. Right? We can use it for that. It becomes things you would ask someone to do, but it becomes a way of doing it without necessarily employing someone. It becomes a handy helper to a certain extent.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And control, how should we think about controlling and not necessarily controlling the AI and the output, because we can talk about that, but it's how do we control the complexity around business design that this is going to generate? Because we talk about having lots of different AI at different parts helping us with processes within that, but it become like an ever increasing web of complexity that we've got to try and knit everything together, and everything needs to work together. Even the AIs need to talk with each other to a certain extent. How do we think enough around that? How do we think about managing that complexity? Maybe we need another AI to do that.
The funny thing is the technology that's helping us can also help us do
Yeah.
that. I think there should be controls. I think you're right. We should be very sensitive to providing guardrails for our people to make
Mm,
sure, hey, you can use AI for this, or you can't send this type of information out to the cloud, right? Because some of the information you have is sensitive and
mm,
proprietary. You don't want that to be out there because once it's out there, now it's you've updated a
mm,
model. Now they're using your data to give
mm,
other competitors and other. So you should have guardrails. You should have do's and don'ts, if you will, and you should figure out how do you provide some type of governance structure. And I'm actually working on a project with a big company with three letters in their name,
Mm,
flying to Tampa tomorrow to
mm.
talk to or Wednesday to talk to them. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Sorry, all this travel around makes me forget where and what time I am at. To talk about AI governance
Yeah.
and create this in air traffic control. So
Mm,
you got all these AIs, you got to land them. You got to see how you land them and make sure you can have this overall governance. I think that's going to be key. And I think if you're telling me what I think banks will need, I think banks will need the ability to manage all these AIs because they're such large organizations and they need a central control tower to understand it, especially with the EU regulation coming along. You need to know where your AI falls into the different categories so
mm.
that you know what your exposure is.
Yeah, it's a bit like the internet. We all get sidetracked with end user shopping as an example, but actually it runs on hardware infrastructure. You've got data centers, you've got fiber optic cables, you've got all this stuff that needs to exist, and all that still needs to exist, and it's fundamental to the workings of it. And I suppose the same is true with AI in terms of you've got to understand the data, you've got to understand like how it connects together, where it's being used, all those kind of things. So all of that governance stuff still exists, kind of is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just another technology. And I could say quantum will be the same way, right? And so it's having really those structured approaches to govern these new technologies. And then the next new technology that you and I don't even know about yet will be the same conversation. So
Where do you think it's going to go from here? A couple of years ago, we were all talking about the metaverse or the metaverse, when we were talking about that, and that's fallen off. Is that kind of like dead and gone, or do these sort of like new technologies that are out there maybe just because you can be a little bit ahead of your time, and then you're just like waiting for the technology to catch up? To a certain extent, quantum can be like that to a certain extent, where the ideas are out there from a theoretical point of view, but we're waiting for the hardware to catch up to a certain extent. Do you think what's out there that you think is we know about that might be coming through? We've got to keep our eyes on.
I think I think it's the intersection between all of these technologies, and
Mm,
don't underestimate the creativity of people, the human
mm,
ingenuity. There's people that are going to bring technologies together to say, wow, I never thought about putting this along with this to create X. And so I think there are probably technologies out there that exist today
mm,
that the intersection between AI and quantum, between security and AI, different things that are actually going to move the needle. And it's exciting times. We've got the space economy, right? So using imagery for farming, right?
yeah.
Or autonomous vehicles and getting around distribution. There's so many people and so many different things that it's actually quite exciting. And the hard part for me, Chris, is knowing where to dive in deep and where to
Yeah.
focus my energy because there's opportunities everywhere.
It does feel like everything's accelerating at a huge pace, and I suppose even with AI, I suppose to a certain extent, an extra computing power, that's further accelerating even further. It becomes exponential, doesn't it? Like how fast we can move. You can get AI to solve mathematical questions, look into the future, those kind of things. So it becomes this sort of accelerating kind of race. Do you see that continuing in the next little while? Even in terms of things like science, as an example, do you use AI to solve and pull together different ideas for quantum mechanics or quantum computing, as an example?
I do. I do see it. If you think about all of humanity, and let's just say
Mm,
you put all humanity on a spectrum of a 24-hour clock, right?
mm,
And you look at when we back to when we discovered fire
yeah.
and where was landing on the moon? Where is
Mm,
global communications? Where are we today? It's like a steep.
mm,
I think that I heard a stat that we've produced more data in the last 2 years
mm,
than we've produced in all of humanity the years
yeah.
before that. And it's just going to get even more. And yeah, I think so. I think there and so many people that specializing in doing things that we're all doing our part and we're having breakthroughs.
Yeah.
And these breakthroughs are multiplying against each other to really have bigger impacts. We have better ways to communicate now. We have better ways to share information. And so, yes, I think things are going to get faster. I think the Prime Minister of Canada said it best. It said that the pace of change is going to get faster, and what is it? The pace of change is fast, and it will only get faster from here.
Yeah, it's almost like we feel like it's done, but there's always more that gets squeezed out as well. It's a bit like when you put the rocks in the jar and you fill it up with sand, and then you fill it up with water, and you can always fit more in. It feels like we're in that kind of race to a certain extent. I was at an event the other day, and there was a slide that was talking about the amount of information that's held in DNA as an example, and the amount of information you could store in a single strand of DNA would be enough to, I do some crazy stuff just in the tiniest little cell. So
Yeah.
it's just that concept that we think we're done, we're not even there yet. There's so much more we can do. And this is just within what we know.
Yeah, and funny enough, you mentioned this storing data and DNA. I was looking at a company in Boston,
Mm,
and they're creating synthetic DNA exactly for that, to
yeah.
store data that is more protected, that can store more information. It's just incredible the amount of, and so these are the things. And you talk about the jar. We're going to now forget the jar. That's not our capacity anymore. Now
Yeah.
it's an oil tanker.
Yeah.
And then next time it'll be a whole planet. So the thing is, there is no capacity. And I know it's hard for people to understand. I think that's the incredible part of what we have. It's just we have such great opportunity. Now, the important part is making sure we're using it ethically and to
Mm.
benefit people instead of it using maliciously. But I have confidence that we're putting in the right guardrails to do that.
And to go a little off topic into the world of sci-fi and philosophy to a certain extent, what I find interesting is we talk a lot about large language models and neural networks and like how they start to interact with each other, even the word around hallucinations to a certain extent. And it trends back to humans to a certain extent. It trends back to the way our brains are wired and the way we interpret the world, the way we look at the world. Even when you're talking about agentic AI, it's almost like having lots of little agents all talking to each other, a bit like humans. Or we're talking about DNA for storage, and it's almost like, are we just discovering ideas that are already there anyway? To a certain extent, it's almost like we're trending back through a different path, back to what we are to a certain extent. It feels like it's like a big circle sometimes.
Chris, if you think about
Mm,
quantum computing is using the operating system of nature
mm,
to operate. So nature is incredibly efficient.
mm,
And so what we're trying to find is what are those secrets in nature and how do we apply those?
mm.
The world around you is quantum mechanical. The only
Yeah,
way for us to simulate that world is through a quantum computer.
yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but I think about 1.2, 1.5 of the world's energy is used to create ammonia.
Mm,
That ammonia is used to create fertilizer. That
mm.
fertilizer is used to create food.
Mm,
The only reason we spend so much energy to do that is because we don't know how to simulate that chemical reaction that
mm,
nature does it
mm,
to make that happen. So imagine if with a quantum computer that's strong enough in the future that we're able to simulate that and able to do it as efficiently as
mm,
nature does it, we
mm.
can lower
Energy
the
costs, yeah.
consumption of energy.
Yeah, I'm sure there's areas out there that are almost like those key pivot points that could just have dramatic improvements. And yeah, again, we're not necessarily aware of them. And I think it's to your point, and when what really inspired me when we were chatting is like, how do you think about the future and how do you think about this sort of like 5 year horizon, the 10 year horizon? And so splitting your time between that, but keeping your eye on what might be out there for 10 years' time to a certain extent, but bringing that back. That was a really important takeaway for me.
Good, good. I'm glad it hit the mark.
Steve, thanks very much for making the time. I really appreciate it. It's fascinating, and it's been fascinating to chat with you about some of the ideas that are out there. I'd say, just to finish off, if there were like three things you'd really say, look, you've got to have this on the radar, particularly on the 10-year kind of landscape, and what would you say they are? Quantum computing feels like that might be 10 years out, but you might say, actually, with some of the breakthroughs, it might actually come in a couple of years' time. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I'm definitely the use of AI to help us to don't write AI off. So there's a
Mm,
lot in the AI space that I think
mm,
will have an impact. AI, we're just in the crawling phase.
yeah,
We're going to start walking and we're going to start running,
yeah,
and that's going to have a big impact. So I think and I know it's a simple answer, but AI is definitely one of them. Obviously, I'm doing a lot in quantum. I think quantum from security perspective, from drug
yeah.
discovery, from better technologies around developing longer lasting batteries for autonomous vehicles, it's going to have an impact across the board. And as these things get better, I have a lot of confidence that we'll get there. The other part is really thinking about all this around space.
Mm,
We're all focused on what's here.
Mm.
There's a lot of opportunity out there, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
99.9 gazillion stuff that is available and out there. And what are those opportunities? That to me seems interesting. And that's why I'm really looking at more space economy, these technologies in space, being able to create materials in space that can't be created here on Earth
Yeah.
that will have a benefit. And those are some of the exciting things I'm looking at. But who knows, in next couple of weeks, I might come and tell you it's something else. And
Yeah. I
so
mean,
part of it is having a pulse on many different things.
yeah, I think that the takeaway for me was just like, I've got to watch this space in terms of just watching what's coming through, watching the trends, because these things can surprise us, but have a view to the future. But then it's really around tracking it almost like permanently to see what's bubbling up to a certain extent.
Yeah. Yes.
Steve, thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And it's great to chat to you and hear what the future is to a certain extent.
Excellent. Chris, great. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks very much.